Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and we have a pretty good build today. Honestly, I think this might be the highest DPR build you can do. Maybe I'm wrong. There might be some weird workarounds, but as far as like a basic build that anyone can pick up without a ton of system knowledge, this is definitely going to be probably the highest damage build you can get. Today we're going to be talking about my 1000 cuts build for the new remastered Ranger, which honestly, Ranger really didn't get much changes, though there were actually some changes to how this build worked. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, so this build's whole idea is you move up to an enemy and you attack them as much as possible. All attack actions, all spent on attacking. It's as easy as that. It's very, very simple. And it's one of the few builds in the game that using all your actions for attacking are actually viable because of Flurry Ranger and how it pretty much negates the majority of what makes multi-attacking bad in the game. Which, to be fair, on your second attack, it's usually not that bad, but the third attack is usually not worth it for most characters, except for the Ranger. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So first, let's talk about our ability modifiers or scores. First, we're going to focus on Dexterity as our primary class and primary attack stat in general. This is for a variety of reasons, but the biggest one is we're going to be using a lot of agile weapons, and most agile weapons in the game are finesse weapons. So, that being the case, this is just the best way to go. Now, there are some things where I could see you going with like a strength route for some certain weapons, like good one-handed weapons, but agile weapons are super necessary for the build, in my opinion, because they'll just increase your overall accuracy, which in turn will mean your damage will inherently go up. Our secondary attribute is going to be strength, and this is just because no matter even if you're using a finesse weapon, your strength modifier still adds to your damage. So getting our strength up as much as possible is going to be very important. And for the third stat, honestly, I'm going to go with wisdom. Normally I put something like con here because, obviously not dying is good. But the whole point of this build is to burst the enemy down before they can kill you first, more or less. And with our high dex, meaning that we have not a bad AC, this is just a really good way to ensure that first, you're going first in combat because we're going to probably be using perception more often than not when it comes to initiating combats, but maybe dex because of stealth opportunities. And in addition, the ranger is already a very focused on like their wisdom scores for like survival, perception checks, or whatever, being one of the few classes that gets legendary in perception. So to make our character effective even outside of combat with a build that really doesn't offer much else, and like having a good wisdom is honestly not going to be a bad idea for this character. Skill focus purposes, the only skill we're really going to worry about is stealth. Just because the whole point of the build is to get as close to an enemy as possible and then just start burning all your actions on, destroying them with a flurry of blows or a flurry of cuts, I guess. Flurry of blows is a very different feature. That being the case, stealth will actually allow us to hopefully position better before combat starts and get closer to an enemy so that we can just burst them down. Because honestly, in combat, if you're not attacking, you're just not doing the build right. So that being the case, stealth is pretty much the only skill that we're going to be really utilizing. Hunter's Edge, I think it's very obvious which route we're going with. We're going to be taking the Flurry Edge because it makes multi-attack penalties so minor and at end game almost non-existent. So that being the case, it just makes the most amount of sense. And let me explain to you, if you're unfamiliar with the game, which I'm sure many people who are looking up builds are, the benefit of Flurry is that when you make multiple attacks in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, your second and third attacks are going to be less accurate because they're going to have a penalty. So with Flurry, we reduce the penalty to what would be 4 for our offhand attack because we're using an agile weapon, will become 2. And for our third attack and every attack after the third attack, and what would have been -8 actually becomes -4, which is pretty good. Which means even with our third and on fourth, fifth, whatever attacks, we are going to be hitting more accurately than most classes are on their second hit in the round. That's nuts. And at the late game, it gets even better because our second attack will be only at a -1, and our third attack and onward will only be at -2. This is an insane feature and it makes the build work really well. But more importantly than that, this makes this one of the most accurate classes in the game. Even though everyone likes to tout about fighters +2 and how it makes their first hit much more likely to crit, the ranger just after the first strike is more accurate than the fighter forever for this, pretty much. Even with the fighter getting abilities like double slice or the like that gives them their same multi attack for 2 attacks, the ranger can just attack more at a higher accuracy anyway. So like it's something that makes the ranger really really good, very very high DPR. The only cost is you do need to hunt prey your target first, which is an action that we're spending not attacking, but it's necessary for the build. So with all that said and done, let's go ahead and get to our feat. So for our first level feat, we're going to take Twin Takedown. This is pretty easy, obvious choice. Twin Takedown is really good because we get to spend a singular action to attack twice. Now this does have the Flourish trait, and because we're going to be using this more often than not, that means we can't put any other Flourish actions into our kit. For those who don't know, Flourish means that you can only do that action, a singular action with the Flourish trait once. That's what it means. So that being the case, even in our first round of combat, we can hunt prey, stride up to the target, and then attack them twice, which is really good action efficiency. And after that round, you can attack 4 times every round because you'll get to hunt prey, or not hunt prey, you'll get to Twin Takedown for 2 actions, or for 2 attacks, and then your next 2 actions are just 2 more attacks. So on average, as long as you don't need to move or anything, you're going to be attacking your target 4 times around easy. And most of those attacks will probably be hitting, and you have an insanely high chance to crit just due to, quantity of strikes. Now, one of the key elements to this build is heavy use of the Rogue Multiclass Archetype, which we'll be selecting at level 2. Now, the actual Archetype dedication itself isn't really going to give us anything besides stealth if we haven't already invested in it, and thievery just as a bonus, which is okay. But the biggest part is at level 4, we're going to be taking the basic Trickery, and we're going to get Twin Feint. What Twin Feint does is it's a 2-action ability that we wouldn't probably be using until our second round of combat, but this gives our strikes even more efficiency because what it allows us to do is if we're adjacent to a foe, when our turn starts, we use our Twin Takedown to attack the enemy twice, and then we use Twin Feint to attack with a third time, and then the last strike will make the enemy automatically flat-footed. This will reduce their AC by 2, and of course make it more likely for us to hit. Now, the benefit to this, really more than anything, is if we're unable to flank with an ally, then this is the best way to just get flanking when we're burning an enemy down pretty much by ourselves. And this actually goes on to a really good point on the build. A good portion of how this build really works is going to be highly dependent on your ability to position yourself accurately. That means getting the enemy flat-footed, typically by flanking with an ally. Now, Twin Feint allows us to do this when that's just not possible, if the enemy is backed up against a corner, or we're just, taking a lone target by ourselves. It's just important to know that off guard, I've been reading some of the old stuff on Archive of Nethys. Off guard is really good. It reduces the enemy's AC by 2. That just makes us more accurate, meaning we do more damage inherently, which is just, it's really, really good. And at late game, as I mentioned before, that's enough to actually give us a bonus on our multiple attacks because, we'll have a -1 on our second attack and a -2 on all other attacks. So on our second attack, we're still getting a net positive on ability to hit the enemy. and on our third attack onwards, it's just going to be flat even of what it would have been before. So with twin feint, we don't need to spend an action feinting to make an enemy off guard. It's just really, really good. It's a very solid setup, and it continues on as at level 6, we're going to be picking up Sneak Attacker. This is where the build really starts taking off, because how a Sneak Attacker works is if the enemy is off guard and you strike them with an agile finesse weapon, which we're going to be doing, they're going to take an additional D4 damage of precision damage specifically. And while precision damage doesn't work on all types of enemies, it definitely works on a good majority of them. So if you're flanking an ally, all your attacks are doing an additional D4 damage, which is really, really good. And it makes this build absolutely nuts. Now, with the rogue stuff done for the moment, we're going to go back to Ranger, and at level 8, we're going to pick up Disrupt Prey. This is actually an insanely good action, but the major reason why I'm selecting it is it just gives us more opportunities to attack the opponent, which is a big portion of the build. What it does is it's like a reactive strike. As a reaction, if the enemy makes any kind of movement action or any kind of manipulate action or the like, we're able to strike that enemy. And if the attack is a critical, we actually disrupt the action, which actually makes this better than Fighter's normal reactive strike, because Fighter's normal reactive strike only disrupts manipulate actions on a critical. This one, though having the caveat that you need to be hunting the prey to do so, actually makes it easier for you to stop an enemy from even moving to get away, completely disrupting the action on a critical. This is just to amp up the amount of opportunities to deal damage to the enemy, and like I said, a big portion of this build is burning an enemy down before they can do the same to you. So if it's a spellcaster or the like, this just gives us a really good opportunity to burn them down before they escape or do something pretty nasty to us. At level 10, we're actually going to be covering for one of our biggest weaknesses, which is the concealed or hidden conditions. When an enemy is concealed, typically you need to make a DC 5 flat check, which if you're unaware, is rolling a D20, a normal D20 with no modifiers, and you need to get a 5 or higher to hit the enemy. And if the enemy is hidden, it actually jumps up to a DC 11, meaning that you have a strictly 50% chance to hit the enemy at that point. What Blind Fight does is first, it completely removes the concealed condition from our concern. So if an enemy is just concealed to us, we don't have to worry about making any kind of DC flat check. We can just attack them as normal. And if the enemy is hidden to us, the DC jumps down to the DC 5 flat check, making us much more accurate. Concealed and hidden is one of the big weaknesses of this kind of build, because it doesn't matter how accurate your strikes are if you just fail the flat check, which has no modifiers. So picking up Blind Fight actually covers one of the major weaknesses of the build. At level 12, we're going to be selecting Second Sting. Now, the reason why we're selecting Second Sting is twofold. First of all, Second Sting is just going to increase our overall damage potential because it removes the no damage fail state, more or less. So what Second Sting does is you need to have the press, or it has the press trait, which means you need to be currently suffering from a multi-attack penalty. So after we use our initial twin takedown to attack the enemy twice, we now qualify for this. We can now use this trait, this new feat, 2 more times in the round, doing 2 second stings. And when we do so, we make an attack like we normally would have anyway. But if we fail, we do the damage we would have dealt with our offhand weapon, excluding any weapon damage die. So what this mostly means is we're going to do our strength modifier in damage and probably any additional we're getting from traits, which we'll get here in a little bit. This just makes it so that even when we miss, we're still doing damage, which increases your damage output by a pretty severe amount. And the especially good part about this is twin feint is only really good when we're not flanking or when we're not currently flanking with an ally. So that being the case, when we are flanking with an ally, then we can switch twin feint out for using second sting 2 times in a row, improving our overall damage potential, and it's just overall more damage efficient. Now, level 14, we're actually jumping back to Rogue because we're going to be selecting Gang Up as our advanced trickery. So with advanced trickery, we can select a rogue feat that is half our level round. I think it's round down. So in this case, we're level 14, so we can select a level 6 feet and below. And wouldn't you know, Gang Up is there. And Gang Up is really good, and it got even better in the remaster because now, as long as we have an ally adjacent to the target, both you and that ally consider the enemy flat-footed, even if you're not, or sorry, off guard, if you're not currently flanking. So that being the case, this allows us to, even if an enemy backs up into a corner, as long as we have an ally adjacent to that target, we are effectively going to be able to get our sneak attacks off much more reliably, which is going to increase our damage potential. And this gives us actually more opportunities to use Second Sting without needing to use Twin Feint. At this point in the build, if you want to retrain Twin Feint for something else, I can definitely see that for sure. I think Twin Fate still has a lot of value because if you're soloing an enemy, which, you know, if there's a lot of mooks running around and you just kind of want to get them out of the way real quick, this is the most efficient way to make sure they get off guard so that they take some of our sneak attack damage from Sneak Attacker. But you can remove it. You can pick up something else like the next feat we're actually going to select up, which at level 16, we're going to take Advanced Trickery again because we can do so, and we're going to take Mobility. Mobility is kind of like a fail-safe situation. So what Mobility allows us to do is, as long as we stride and we move no more than half of our speed, we can avoid any actions or reactions that are provoked by movement. What this really allows us to do is that in a situation where we're trying to like get to an enemy in the back line, for instance, we have a target, we want to burst down like a caster in the background. If there are enemies in front that might have reactive strike, for instance, this allows us to weave in between them to get to the squishy in the back without necessarily suffering a bunch of attacks. This just allows us to better position when necessary, as much as needed, and honestly, it just makes the build work more efficiently in more situations. Like, all this build really is making sure that we can do the job that we are designed to do as quickly and efficiently as possible. And mobility allows us essentially to take a step that is actually half of our stride, which is really, really good. Now, level 18, we're going to be taking Impossible Flurry. And the best part about this is in the remaster, Impossible Flurry was actually combined with Accurate Flurry. So there's a level 20 feat that we don't need to select. And with Impossible Flurry, we get to attack 6 times. 6 times. 3 times with each of the 2 weapons we are dual wielding in this situation. An absolutely insane amount of attacks and damage. And because we're a ranger and getting to this point in the game, we'll have the the greater hunter's edge, or whichever it's called. We're going to be able to attack the enemy 6 times with our max penalty to attacks being a -2. If we're flanking the enemy, we essentially have no penalty to a lot of these attacks, and we'll be getting sneak attack off on every one of them that we hit. Now, this does cause some problems. First of all, it kind of makes Second Sting a little harder to use. But to be fair, this is only in situations where we're free to spend all of our actions attacking. So, again, it's at a point in the game where it's like, this is also an end game thing, so it's not something I feel like is going to necessarily invalidate a majority of the build for anyone for any length of really essential time. But if you want to retrain some of your feats, you can. But the biggest thing is this is the high damage potential. 6 attacks in a round at either a no penalty or a max -2 penalty is absolutely insane. It's really, really good. And for our level 20 feat, we're going to select Ultimate Skirmisher. This makes it so that there's nowhere the enemies can run from us. We ignore all kinds of difficult terrain, hazardous terrain, all kinds of stuff. There's no kind of terrain we cannot cross. And being able to avoid hazardous terrain effect, like negative effect, we can run over lava if we really want to. That's how insane this feature is. It's really, really cool. And again, it just makes us more efficient at the job that we're doing. With Ultimate Flurry. With Impossible Flurry, we're already like, we have as many attacks as we can need. So yeah, this is the build, and it's predominantly a ranger rogue hybrid that uses the rogue sneak attack feature to its best ability and mixing in some other really good features like gang up, which just makes it easier for us to do a lot of damage. This is such a very powerful build. Its damage potential is really good, and it's a really not a difficult build to do. Like, all you have to do is get up to the enemy, make sure you hunt prey first, and then go. Now, I will state as well as whenever you get the opportunity as a general feat, select the fleet general feat. You're going to want the extra movement speed. The more we move, the faster we move, the less likely we spend stride actions to get to where we need to go to start attacking again. So that being the case, also select feat. It's kind of necessary for the build, and it's something that, I would have mentioned earlier before, but I wanted to make sure I got the major class features over so that, I just felt like this was a little bit better organized. All right, the gear section. So, what kind of weapon do we want to utilize? I looked at a lot of weapon. I think there's a lot of very valid weapon choices here. And I think it mostly boils down to what weapons we feel we're going to get the most benefit out of. Now, obviously, we want an agile weapon and we want a finesse weapon. So that does narrow it down quite a significant amount. Now, I went with the War Razor. It's one of my favorite knives in the game, and it's really, really good. The major feature behind it is it's a D6 weapon, or not D6 weapon, it's a D4 weapon that has both the finesse, agile, deadly, and the backstabber trait. Due to the sheer volume of our attacks, getting our deadly D8 off is very, very possible. So that being the case, having a deadly weapon it makes the most amount of sense. But the biggest part of this whole build is backstabbers. So backstabber, whenever we attack a flat-footed creature, we deal an additional precision damage, 1 precision damage in addition to the damage that we're doing. And at the end of the game, when we get a +3 weapon, this damage increases to 2. Now, this just stacks with our sneak attack because they're 2 different sources. So that being the case, whenever we sneak attack, we are doing a D4 +1 damage. And since we want to be getting enemies off guard as much as possible, not only just for sneak attack, but just because it makes their AC reduced, it just makes a lot of sense. The War Razor really makes up for its major difference between some of the other good one-handed weapons that do similar things. Now, there are some better ones, but I'm going to leave that for a little bit later. The War Razor, I feel, is just the general best one, but I'm sure people in the comments will let me know, what they think the better ones are. And actually, speaking of the comments, if you enjoy my build videos, please leave a like so other people get a chance to see it, and subscribe because I try to get at least one new Pathfinder 2e build out every week. So if you want to see one of the new builds as they come out, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. In addition to our War Razors, the types of runes we use are also going to be important. Now, I'm going to choose Thundering as like our first rune we select. Sonic damage is good and honestly one of the least resisted types of damages in the game. Not the least, but one of like the top 5 least resisted damages in the game. So this, every time we hit, we're doing additional sonic damage, which is just very efficient. Now, when you get your weapon up to a +2 greater striking weapon, then I'm going to recommend picking up the shock rune. While electricity damage is a little bit more on the heavily resisted side, it's definitely not as bad as fire and cold damage. So again, one of the reasons why I select it. And again, every time we hit, we're doing now 2 different additional damage dies onto our weapon. And when we get our +3 major striking weapon, I'm going to recommend the speed rune. The speed rune, just because it gives us essentially another attack. We get a quickened action that we can use just to make a strike action with said weapon. So we actually only need this speed rune on one of our 2 weapons, which leaves the other weapon to probably be used with another rune, probably fire or the flame rune or the frost rune, whichever you prefer. You could even go with the corrosive rune, though, acid damage being a lot more resisted in the game than some of the other elements. Take at your own peril. But yeah, these weapon runes are super important because, again, you're going to be attacking a lot. So any kind of damage we can tack on to every one of our strikes increases the damage potential of this build like multiplicativity. Yeah. Multiplicativity? I don't know. It multiplies. Anyway, though I do have a couple other items for us to select here on the build. Boots Abounding are one of the easiest boots in the game to get that give you a status bonus to your speed. So obviously selecting something like this will make our character generally faster. And it has some other benefits in some niche situations where leaping is important. I like Boots Abounding a lot. They're really easy to get. You can get them as early as level 7. So yeah, not bad. There's also the Propulsive Boots. They changed the name. Yeah, Propulsive Boots, which used to be Boots of Speed. So Propulsive Boots allows us to spend an action that we now get as a quickened action to stride every round. And I do believe they give us a +5 status bonus to our speed innately as well, similar to the Boots of Bounding. Now, Boots of Bounding do get up to a +10 to their status bonus, which funny enough, the Propulsive Boots don't. But I do think that it's either way. Now, to use the Propulsive Boots, we have to spend an action to activate them to get the quickened action. So we are losing an attack action potentially through this. But then after that, we don't have to spend any movement, hopefully, or any of our actions moving because we'll have our quickened action. So I think it really pans out either way. Either of these two boots are fine. But I think if you can get Propulsive Boots, go with Propulsive Boots. But if you can't, Boots Abounding work just as well. I actually have a Talisman recommendation that's really good. You're going to want to select the Bloodseeker Beak. This is actually a really easy one to get a hold of, and it appears in a lot of the adventure modules in the game as well. You can get this item as early as level 4, but there is a level 8. Yeah, level 8 variant, though it's a lot more expensive. The Bloodseeker Beak is a talisman. If you're not aware, talismans can be attached to either a piece of armor or a weapon. Each item can only have one, and you attach this one to your weapon. Now, as you do so, as a free action when you use the beak, you can do this when you hit an off-guard creature, and when you do so, you deal an additional D4 precision damage. In addition, if you already are using sneak attack, you do an additional D4 persistent bleed damage. For 20 gold pieces, just putting this on one of your weapons is really easy. It takes 10 minutes, sure, to apply it to your weapon, but I will say that it's really, really worth it. And for 20 gold pieces, which eventually just becomes chump change, that's really good. Now, the level 8 version, I don't know if I recommend nearly as much, because for 5 times the value, you only double the damage. But if you're swimming in gold and, you're level 8 or higher, then sure, get the advanced version of the Bloodseeker Beak. It'll definitely allow you to do even more damage, 2d4 and 2d4 persistent damage. And since we are doing sneak attack, I mean, this particular talisman works really, really well on the build. Again, stacking more damage onto our build. It's nuts. It's really, really crazy. All right, so now we're up to my archetype point. This is going to be a little bit longer video than normal, but that's because gear actually matters for this build, which is very unusual for a lot of builds I do. Anyway, archetypes. So archetype bit is pretty obvious, I think, at this point. If you're using the free archetype rule anyway, I'm going to definitely recommend the dual weapon warrior. There's just a lot of really good features that mix in, and while we definitely aren't going to be using double slice probably as much, as there's really not much of a need to, dual weapon blitz is a really good engagement tool you can use. It's 2 actions and it allows you to stride your full speed, and at any point during that stride you can strike with each of your weapons. So this is essentially 2 attacks and a stride mixed into a singular action. This can be really good in a lot of situations, and because it doesn't have the flourish trait, we can do this when, with our dual or our twin takedown if the target is already hunt preyed. And if not, I mean, there's just an opportunity for us to run up and strike, multiple enemies along the way where we're going anyway. It's a feature that I feel like is warranted here, and this just gives us more 2 weapon options to utilize. But, one of the reasons why I didn't use dual weapon fighter in the build or warrior in the build in the first place is because the rogue features just stacked on the damage better. That's it. But if we can do both, that's even better. The next feature I'm actually going to recommend is Beastmaster with a caveat. So Beastmaster, I think, is a really good option, but it does require us to maneuver our build around or to select the human ancestry so we can select another first level class feat. And the biggest reason why is with Beastmaster, Ranger gets a unique feature with their animal companions. Their animal companions actually benefit from our Hunter's Edge. So, that being the case, if we invest in Beastmaster, we get a pretty powerful animal companion that, even if we're not spending actions commanding, we'll be able to stride or strike themselves, but we'll also be able to benefit from our Hunter's Edge. We would just need to somehow get the animal companion ranger feat, because it has to be the ranger feat specifically, as that's the only one that gives the benefit of the Hunter's Edge to the animal companion in question. Now, obviously, it's not super imperative, and this is more like a gimmicky thing if there's nothing else to select, especially because Flurry only benefits if the animal companion is attacking multiple times anyway. But at the very least, it is an option. We can also flank with our animal companion, which does provide a lot of really good benefits in some situations. So it works really, really well. It's very interesting, and I feel like it can make the build a little bit more dynamic and much more interesting if you want something that's not just I attack the build. The last archetype I'm going to mention is Poisoner, and that's mostly just because it allows us to get extra poisons that we can have on our weapons in the day. We're probably not going to use much of the poison features most of the time, and there's a good number of enemies that just don't really take anything from poison. But for the enemies that do, we'll have some additional poisons to do, in addition to all of our extra damage from sneak attacking, runes, whatever, poison damage from having poisoned weapons. So Poisoner just really made a lot of sense, and it has a really fun reaction where if the enemy attacks you with a non-reach weapon or unarmed strike, we have poison pins in our weapon in our clothes that can poison them back, which I think is also really, really fun. In any regard, these are my archetypes. They're mostly just additions to go with the build. I don't think many of them really would add much more than the build is already doing, instead just giving us more options, which, honestly is not a bad thing, but I figured I'd mention at the very least. And last but not least, we have our Ancestry and Heritage choices for this build. Now, funny enough, this is a selection I normally would look at for Feats or some other features. Heck, I really initially was thinking I was going to select a particular Ancestry or Heritage that just has a higher movement speed so we can become even faster. But that's actually not the case, because these particular ancestries have some really good weapons for us. So first, let's talk about the Goblin. The Goblin has Dog Slicer. Dog Slicer is insanely good for this build. The major reason why is it has almost all the same features as the War Razor, only it does a D6. Now, the only feature it doesn't have is Deadly, but that's okay in my opinion, because if we're consistently able to get the enemy off guard and get the benefits of Sneak Attacker off anyway, I think over the course of the campaign, the Dog Slicer would outperform the War Razor, even though the War Razor's Deadly die would definitely help. I don't think it would do as much as just having a higher base die. So that being the case, the Dog Slicer is a really good option, and it's really easy to get with the Goblin as well. The other option is actually going to be Kobold, and this is to get access to the Fang Wire. The Fang Wire is such an interesting weapon because I don't know how it works as a one-handed implement, but it does, so we can technically dual wield it. There's no requirement here to make it a two-handed weapon or need a second hand. But yeah, it's a wire that you wrap around someone's throat and you garrote them. It's a garrote, essentially. And it's a one-handed weapon, so we could have two Fang Wires if we really, really choose. And the Fang Wire is just a better War Razor. It does all the same things as a War Razor does, and in addition, it has the grapple trait. So if you wanted to invest in your athletics, in addition, you can do so, and you can grapple enemies very easily with it. It's just a cool extra weapon, and both of these weapons, I feel like, add something to the build. Now, I do think the War Razor inherently is just a really good weapon, so you don't have to select these ancestries to be as competitive damage-wise, but they do add some extra layers to it, and I feel like just that alone, like the Dog Slicer probably doing a slightly higher amount of damage is cool, though to be fair, Deadly is always fun when it goes off, and Fang Wire gives us the opportunity to use athletics in a situation where that might be more useful to us, given whatever the combat situation is. So that's the build. This is probably one of the highest DPR builds in the game, if not the highest DPR build in the game. This doesn't require any special tricks, doesn't exploit the system at all. The only thing we do is we run up and we attack. It's that simple. Anyone can use this build, and anyone can use this build to make sure that they do a lot of damage on the field. Now, I will make special mention here at the end. This build works when you use Hunt Prey. Do not neglect using Hunt Prey, even though I know you're going to get super jumpy and want to just get in and start slicing people up. Hunt Prey is necessary to get the benefits of Flurry. But that's such a small requirement, and like I said, this build at base, just without really all too much to it, your first action, Hunt Prey, stride up to enemy, twin takedown. Even if you're going against a bunch of mook enemies that die in a couple hits anyway, you can do this over and over and over again, and you're just taking out an enemy pretty much every turn. It's really good. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.